Hello, folks. Thanks for joining the Defiance podcast. I've got a guest today that I've known for over 30 years now. He's had a fascinating career in technology, and I've gotten to see that career blossom firsthand. He's invested in multiple of my companies, and we've invested together in quite a few others. I've watched his firm, Macedon Technologies, grow from startup to greater than $20 million a year company. So I'm really excited to bring his story to everybody. Austin, thank you so much for joining me today. Before we dig into technology, investing, starting companies, I've got to know, what are you driving these days?
All right, that's a good place to start. I've got an old Lamborghini that, as you might guess, is currently in the shop. And that's fine. Like, my expectations were managed really well by 30 years of car magazines about what you get with an old Lamborghini. So my everyday car is actually the Maserati SUV.
Oh wow, that's awesome. Both very nice cars.
Thanks.
Of course, you have me here when the Lamborghini's in the shop, so I can't get to go for a ride with you.
And last time you were here, it was pouring, so.
That's true. So, early in your career, and we'll talk through it, but I want to lead with, early in your career, it's pretty safe to say you were a pure tech guy.
Oh yeah,
Stereotypical. And I think you were a developer at Home Depot, and then at a consultancy, and then at Appian.
Yeah.
Is that correct? So I wouldn't have described you at all as a salesperson, sales manager, or really a leader. And most people at that age aren't going to have those qualities. Something changed when you came to Amentra, where you and I worked together. Can you describe what you took from that experience, and maybe talk about the transition from pure tech developer at Home Depot, learning about consulting and selling and leadership and all of those other things, and just how that journey worked and kind of how Amentra fit into that overall?
Yeah, John, that's a great question. That's a real coming of age for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I grew up on video games and then started writing video games and then realized computer science was an actual major, right? So I kind of backed into technology that way, and it was just a great fit for, all my nerdiness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my, lack of social skills and all that fun stuff. And while I was going through all that, I saw you on this kind of parallel journey, right? Where you were reading a lot of econ and you were learning a lot of business concepts, and you were also backing into technology, right? Like, we took high school computer science together and it was fun, but that wasn't your passion, right?
Sure.
And then somehow we both kind of ended up in the same place in the world of consulting, right? Technical services. And I think it was at Amentra where I really saw that there was a broader world out there and an ability to create your own destiny beyond just writing software, right? And I realized I was behind in a lot of skills, right? There was a lot of relationship stuff with clients that had never been on my radar before, right? It was like I got to the next level of a video game and realized that it was much tougher than anything I had prepared for, right? And I knew that in order to get to the next level in life, I needed to learn a lot of those business skills and learn, account management and how to staff a team. And ones and zeros had almost nothing to do with it, right? I mean, who you hire is actually much more of a predictor of your success than whether you happen to know the ones and zeros.
And how you lead them and how you manage
Absolutely.
them.
And you got me into a lot of books, whether it was Call Me Ted or some of the other business stuff you were reading at the time about how people went from being executors to running a business to running an empire. And I realized that getting deeper into ones and zeros was a small part of the picture. And I think that's when I got some opportunity at Amentra. I got to run their BPM practice. And I got just exposure to those broader concepts, and eventually realized I could go create my own little ecosystem and try my hat at this thing called leadership that I had just discovered.
It's interesting because I think whenever anybody works with talented entrepreneurs, and Amentra was chock full of those.
Yes.
There were probably 6 or 7 people who would go on to start their own company, and just or even at the point where I joined, which is when it was 8 or 9 people, and I'd say by the time we were 30 or 40, 7 or 8 of those folks have gone on to start their own company, and a couple of exits as well that have happened along the way. But I think people get really inspired by that, because it's one thing to see a really smart technical person in a university setting or in a big corporate setting, but when you sit down with a real hustler who is always thinking with their head on a swivel, how do I create an opportunity out of this? I think most people can do that. Just a lot of them have never seen it And that's a big part of the reason I started this podcast, was to just expose my audience to as many folks who have made the decision like you, like, hey, I'm a great technical guy, I could go have a wonderful career doing this, but I think it's going to be a lot more rewarding if I figure out how to do it on my own. So
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Can you give the folks an overview of Mastodon, but also of Appian? We haven't really talked much about Appian yet. We did mention that you worked there for a little bit, but can you talk about what Appian is, what they've achieved, kind of where they are in their journey, your relationship to Appian, and then what Mastodon does?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Appian has been a big part of my life for probably the last 15 years. I worked there when they were a startup. You know, they were an idea that was just starting to execute, and they wanted to build this platform, right, to build enterprise applications that was just very forward thinking, and that was going to take advantage of trends before anyone knew they were trends. You know, I remember in 2006, their CEO, Matt Calkins, was going to said all of our software needs to run in the cloud. And of course, we all went and Googled, what's the cloud, right?
Amazon launched in 2006, I believe.
Yeah, it was probably about that same day. But, you know, they had vision and were building this product that I thought could really take over the world. And, you know, if you fast forward to where we are 15 years later, they are deployed in, you know, Fortune 500 and even Fortune 10 customers left and right, a lot of governments.
Did they IPO?
2000. They IPO'd last year.
Okay.
And you know, they've been very successful as a public company, but their product continues to get better. And they did it taking very little capital along the way, actually, which was really interesting. They used their consulting ability to generate cash and then underwrite their own product ideas, basically. Which was really cool. It was the first time I'd ever seen that done successfully. But yeah, their product basically supports digital transformation, right? Which I think of as large enterprises coming into the 21st century and realizing that, you know, as a customer, I judge my choice of airline based on my tech experience, right? If my flight's delayed, do they text me with a link to rebook, or do I have to call them and wait in a 30-person line, right?
Sure.
Everyone is a software company nowadays, and Appian's platform really enables that sort of transformation where you've got, you know, a layer of old legacy systems that you still need to get value on, but you need to put updated mobile interfaces on them. You need some way to access them through the cloud so that users that aren't, you know, sitting behind your firewall in your building can actually be productive with the software that's client and employee facing, right? And that's a pretty big paradigm shift, and Appian's technology is really enabling that both worldwide and across verticals.
It's fascinating to me because there's almost no clients that we ran across at Level who didn't have some flavor of Appian running to some extent.
Yeah.
It really is very ubiquitous software at this point.
It is, and I mean, having been there when they were a startup, you know, that's amazing. At some point, you know, all these ideas converged, right? The stuff I had learned at Amentra about how a services company runs and what it takes to be successful with an enterprise client that you're developing software for. I realized that, you know, Appian had no dominant partner in their ecosystem, and at the time they were probably still too small to, you know, this was 10 years ago. And I went to their C-level team and said, I'm going to be that first partner, and Appian's going to be all we do. And, you know, 10 years later, they've gone through their IPO and they're really taking over their industry, and we're right there with them, pushing 150 consultants down.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So it's a Mastodon. That Mastodon is a consulting company that supports Appian deployments.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, our original actual legal name is Mastodon Consulting because I wanted us to be a consulting company, and then I realized that there are a lot of misconceptions out there about what consultants actually do, right? I realized that what we do is really build technology solutions for our clients, right? It's not like we take Appian's platform and hit the install button and then walk away.
Sure.
Appian's platform is more like a language. It's a modern toolkit that lets you harness the power of either your legacy systems or your web APIs or really anything that you can connect to and build enterprise-grade applications that solve very complex problems. And we're the solvers of those problems. We're the experts at using that tool to interact in your environment and do very flexible things, whether it's at, you know, kind of the data orchestration layer or even user interface where you might have complex ideas that need to work seamlessly across a web interface and mobile. And we build those things using Appian's platform and language.
That's great. And at some point, I hope the conversation goes towards kind of comparing and contrasting that approach with the level approach, which was much broader and not as focused. And I've seen a couple of companies have the wild success that you're having using your strategy. But I do want to come back to that in a little bit.
Cool.
So you talked about it a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about the jump from working at Amentra to starting Mastodon? It sounds like, if I recall correctly, you were probably running a 10 or 12 person project in DC at the time at Amentra, or maybe you had moved on to another client, but you had this aha moment where you said, okay, I've learned what I'm going to learn here. I've got Matt's buy-in on this at this point. You know, what was there an exact moment where you said, now I'm going and doing it, or was it that moment where Matt said, yeah, you could be my premier partner?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Appian's Global Users Conference, which is now called Appian World and is a really big deal, happened to be around that same time, and I happened to be there as Amentra's rep.
Okay.
And so I got to talk to all of those people, and I kind of got to gauge the market and see that there was a lot of demand out there, and there was really no one with the skill set to take it at the time. And I just kind of realized that if all I did was staff, you know, the same size teams I was running at Amentra and run the same kinds of projects, that was a lot of opportunity. And if I could just get from 0 to that point, you know, that looked like the finish line to me, to get up to, you know, 10 people, right? And maybe even have office space.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, you know, at some point as I was talking to people, I that feeling that, you know, I can actually do this just grew and expanded. And at some point, you know, I started writing up, you know, what I guess you would call a business plan, and registered a couple of domain names on GoDaddy, none of which wound up being the actual company name once I thought about it for a while. But yeah, you know, just went through that process, and it's amazing just how much stuff there is out there. You know, I read a bunch of blogs on how to start your own company, and read a bunch of books, and you know, there are a bunch of details and legal stuff you have to get right, but there are a lot of websites that walk you through it now. And
sure.
I actually did all that a couple of months before I pulled the trigger and told anyone, you know, because I felt like I had to get all that paperwork out of the way and was worried I might screw it up. And then eventually, time came to quit my day job. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that call.
you were in Aruba at the time.
I think we were at a wedding in Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, maybe that was it,
yeah. Yeah. It's interesting the things that you remember. And obviously at the time it probably created a headache for me.
Probably.
Actually, I think by that point I had you out on the West Coast.
Yeah, I was kind of trying to do a sales engineer role and try to get West Coast off the ground for Amentra, and it kind of was a good time to make a clean break from that perspective too. You know, that I had just come off of a project and was transitioning to a role that didn't really exist. So why not transition to my own?
So you, in your mind, you were going to have made it when you got to 10 or 12 people. How long, do you recall how long it took you to get to 10 and 12?
About 2 years, actually.
Okay. But you went for a year where it was really you and a real small number of people, if I recall. And then you hit the point where it really started to take off. Is that correct?
Yeah, and you know, some of that is just our model, right? That we do almost all of our hiring right out of college undergrad programs. And so the downside to that is there are only a few very specific times a year that your employees can start working for you, corresponding to when they graduate from college. So, you know, I got 3 or 4 my first summer, and then probably another 5 or so the summer after that. And fortunately, nobody left in the first 4 years or so. So we were able to build the team kind of 5 at a time, and that was pretty good growth year over year.
Yep. It's funny, we share an accountant, which was probably part of what made you feel very good about getting that paperwork ready. Having someone, because I believe your accountant did business with your father.
Yeah, Ron was my dad's accountant. So,
but I remember Ron telling me when we were talking, he's like, have you talked to Austin? And I said, yeah. And he said, man, he has the most loyal employees. I don't think he's lost one yet.
Yeah. Of course, that's the upside of starting a business in 2009, right?
That's true.
You've got 3 or 4 years of no one poaching your employees ahead of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so I mentioned kind of the distinction between building a laser-focused technology company on one technology and taking a broader approach. And I think we've hit on the first obvious difference. So at Level, if you contrast our approach, it was, we're going to come in and help you do digital transformation, but it might be that we're coming in and helping you out with a design and you don't even know what you're building. It might be we're helping you make the business case for something, or it might be that we're helping you figure out a new architecture. But the point is, we're coming from any angle. We were focused in the sense that we're doing digital transformation, and we felt like there were a bunch of different components to go into it. But the reality for us is I don't think we did a college hire until we hit 40 people.
Yeah.
So, and naturally, when you're coming from a position of let me help you figure out what you need to figure out, you better have helped people figure it out.
Yeah, experience matters in that sense. Yeah.
Sure. And the reality is I think the big advantage to the approach you've taken is that because you know exactly what you're going to be working on, you can develop a much more comprehensive training program. And so people come out of a 6 or an 8 week boot camp at Macedon and they're ready to take on real world projects. At level, we maybe could staff somebody out of college after 6 weeks of training with our people. We could maybe put them on as a number 5 or a number 6 on a project.
Yeah, it's interesting, breadth versus depth, right? And there are kind of a couple of aspects to that. There's, the sales strategy of when you have to go tell the world what you do, do you say we are the best in the world at one thing, or do you say we have this broad set of experiences, any one of which could help you, but we don't necessarily know which going in, right? But what we wound up with was kind of exactly what you're talking about, right? And part of that is, especially back in those days, there was no market for Appian developers, right? Like, remember, I felt like I had a monopoly on knowledge when I started this company, right? Sure. So that means I can't go out into the market and just hire people that already know it, because by definition, there aren't that many of them. So I realized that if I just hired smart people right out of school and taught them, the things that only I knew, 2 weeks into that guy's career, he does have a leg up on the competition, right? And I could staff, small teams with me as the project manager in the early days and get, maybe 2 people on each project under me to be really productive and produce good stuff. And then, of course, I was always quality control too.
That's great. And you also, I think, this is a two-edged sword. I think you're able to command a better rate because you can demonstrate pure technical expertise because you actually have it. It's a lot harder if you're selling Java developers on a project, or if you're selling .NET developers or Node developers, and you don't have a way to show that there's an expertise. And so I feel like your rates for pure tech work were always higher. Now our approach was, but we can drive higher rates for our subject matter experts, our domain experts, our designers, and other things. And what we did discover eventually was that when we started leading with business consulting and transitioning that into technology consulting, the tech rates went up because we were no longer being compared with the Cognizants of the world, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, obviously having a differentiated skill set, whether it's tech or in other areas, is the way to beat commodity players every time. We had a couple of really interesting economic factors in our favor as all this was unfolding. One of which is, there are published reports out there that you can go read by Gartner and Forrester and those types that say building an application on Appian is 20 times as fast as building it in Java.
Wow.
Right? So if you look at the economics of measuring cost versus output, which is what you should measure instead of cost versus input, you'd see that, if you were trying to get ditches dug and one guy's holding a shovel and my guy's driving a bulldozer, my guy's hourly rate might be higher, but you would much rather my guy digging your ditches with a bulldozer, right?
Sure.
Like asking what they charge by the hour doesn't even matter when one guy can use a tool in a way that gets you 20 times more power, right? Because we might literally be able to do a project in 1/20th the number of hours.
Sure.
So we were able to take advantage of that. We were able to take advantage of, just being better at the technology than a lot of people out there because of,
it's an innovative technology, which for when it's solving the type of problem it's designed to solve, it is going to be 20 times.
Right.
It's why they IPO'd.
It is, and it's going to get better than 20 times better. That's always been Matt's vision. He calls it reverse Moore's law. Right, cut the time to build the same application in half every 18 months.
Okay,
like
that's great.
Right? Through better software tools, and he's lived up to it. Like so far, that tool has just gotten better and better and better every release. And what I love about it is they release quarterly, and for someone who is only focused on that one tool, that gives us an incredible advantage because our people are motivated to be on the latest and greatest and be cutting edge, and we're updating our wiki every time that new release comes out. Right? Again, getting back to depth, all we ever talk about is Appian. So when something new with Appian comes out and we embrace and absorb it, and our competitors are still 3 versions behind, great, that lets us go, do sales demos that show off those new capabilities, or go show an existing client how we can modify what they already have to take advantage of those capabilities, right? And so we love being on, the cutting edge of an ever-changing world.
Absolutely. When did Mastodon get too big for you to manage by yourself? Was it when you were 2 projects? Because you were managing the projects, as you said. Was it when there were 3? Was it 4? Or was it more of an evolution in different time periods where it became unwieldy for you?
I think 30 people was the biggest kind of collection of headaches I ever had. There's kind of this evolution, right, where things are fine, and you add 2 or 3 people and things are fine, and then at some point you get past some tipping point and you say, wow, I need another layer of management, because either I can't keep my hands on it all, or my next 2 or 3, stars can't keep their hands on it all with what I delegated to them. And I think we went through that evolution, just like everyone else that grows through that size does, because I think by definition, you can't get bigger than that unless you figure it out, right?
Sure.
At some point, you would start losing customers as fast as you were gaining new ones if you couldn't manage all the accounts, right? And so we realized, you need levels above project manager, right? People who have the broader context, and people who know about how to, build your own IP and then get value at multiple customers with it, right? And concepts like that were foreign.
So you do a lot of that, or?
Yeah, we do now. Whether it's at the level of some small component that does something cool with PDFs, or something larger that's a 60% solution of an entire application that then just needs to have some customizations bolted onto it to solve a client's particular version of that problem, right?
Yep.
As we got bigger, as we had bench, as we could look across our portfolio of clients and find common needs, we did develop a lot of that IP, which was great, not only from a, helps us get a foothold in with clients and deliver value faster standpoint, but it also gave our people on the bench something to work on.
Absolutely.
That was really valuable training, right? And we've always run our bench projects like real projects with the same agile cadence and a scrum master and code reviews to, haze people, particularly as they were new at things, so that we could get people used to how we built software. And then when you drop them on a client, they're already not only running very fast because they know the tools, but they're running in the right direction and can just keep pace with whatever team and environment you've dropped them into.
That's great. That's great. So I've often described the process of building, I think any company, but service companies I have the most experience with. It really is just like any other process that you're optimizing, and especially optimizing as it's changing. You address the biggest bottleneck at the moment.
Yeah, constraint, right?
And then all of a sudden you have a new bottleneck, and you just, it sounds very reactive, but it actually is a very effective way to optimize any system. Is just, what is the biggest bottleneck? Put 100% of my resources into fixing that. Oh shit, now recruiting is the bottleneck.
Yeah, exactly.
And you often find that things, I think you hit on this, that things become bottlenecks that you had solved before, but now you're at just a completely different quantum level.
Yeah.
Where you're solving for the same bottleneck, but it's a very different reason that it's the bottleneck now.
Right. So. Right. I mean, one of the things I always thought was interesting was like the twin pipelines of sales and recruiting, right? If I go sell a bunch of projects, I need people to do them, right? And if I hire a bunch of people, I need projects for them to do eventually before I run out of money, right? And to grow at 100% a year or whatever you're growing year over year, you kind of have to have those two in some balance, right? Within a margin of error, right? And like you said, you get to the point where it's no longer me picking 3 schools that I like and going to their career fairs by myself, right?
They've got a basketball game I'd like to watch, and the career fairs.
Yeah, exactly. But then it's scaled to, well, we need to go to 20 career fairs, and we need to have more than one person in each booth, right? Yeah. And we also need an internet presence that helps us recruit, and well, now we need like a recruiting department, right? Oh, we're processing 20,000 resumes a year or whatever it is, and it's again not just me reading through a stack and picking the 5 I want to hire, right? And then the same thing happened with sales. Obviously, at some point, it was no longer me doing a lot or even most of the selling, right? I needed a team that could go build a pipeline, go execute on getting deals closed, getting deals fruitful.
Now I've met 3 or 4 of your top lieutenants, and you've got some top-notch people now. When was the first time, and I feel like you think of them as partners in the business.
Absolutely.
When was what was the environment like where you decided I need to go find a partner, or did you not? They just rose to the top naturally, or did you ever go actively seek, I'm going to find somebody who's going to become a partner in this business?
I think it was more the organic route, where I had people that were literally climbing through the ranks of management faster than I could come up with titles for them. And I realized that, if we're going to go scale a business, I need to just give those guys bigger and bigger challenges. And I mean, it's absolutely worked. And I think probably the year we did 4 or 5 million was the first time I, gave a couple of those guys stock options and said, we're all going to be in this together for the long haul.
That's great. Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk about everybody as a shareholder, but I don't think that everybody appreciates it. I think the people who go help you build it, if it's a smaller group and it's more finite, I personally think that that's a more effective way than everybody's going to be a shareholder.
Yeah, I mean, at some point it's about who can run the business, right? And if you're running a 4 or 5 person team, that's great. If you're running, multiple accounts and you have, things escalating to you across multiple levels and you're really juggling, that's the point where you've got a slice of our business under you, right? And that's the point where we need to scale and have 5 or 10 or however many of those. And then obviously any layer of management that, like I said, I learned the hard way I needed every time to put above them. And that's usually where, things like options come into it, because those are the people that not only do I not want to lose, but that also I feel like are running the business and need to be running it the way I am and need to be quite literally invested.
Yep, absolutely. So you mentioned the balance between the bench, and for those who've never worked for a consulting company, when you're not on a project, you're on the bench.
Yep.
So we like our sports references.
We did.
And really bench management, or as I think of it, logistics is what we called it at the bench run level, is one of the things that if companies get right, they do very well, and if they don't do right, they're never going to scale, and many will even implode on themselves, because you're constantly balancing. If I go sell a project to a large bank and then they say, okay, great, come staff it with 6 people, and I don't have anybody on the bench,
right?
Now I've got to go pull employees from another project. And you can imagine if you're working at a retailer and Jeff is your favorite developer of all time and he's been there for 6 months, Jeff might be bored with working on your project. So it sounds great, but I'm going to pull Jeff from retailer A and move Jeff to bank B. But I've got to have a very difficult conversation with the project manager on the retail side. And these are all of the things that this is the business of consulting that I found I could hire a lot of developers at level and teach them, okay, this is how you run a consulting business. To me, that's running a consulting business. I'd love to get, if you've got any war stories you'd like to talk about that, but I'd also like to get your overall theory there of how you balance it. And can you maybe speak to what was the worst bench situation you ever had? Either I need to hire 12 people tomorrow, or oh shit, I've got 20% of my workforce sitting down doing nothing.
We've absolutely had every one of those situations. It's interesting. Again, starting at the top from kind of a philosophy perspective, right? We want to be the world's foremost experts at Appian, and to do that, we need to be hoarders, right? When we train and create someone who is one of those experts, we don't want that person to hit the street, right? And we've never laid anyone off, because we always think that the market is heading up, and if we have 20 people on the bench, there's going to be a day where we need those 20 people. And so far, it's always worked out great, right? And in fact, we take that same leap of faith every summer, right? We've got 30 or 40 new rookies that come on now to keep our growth at a reasonable percentage clip as we're over 100 people. And we don't hire based on pipeline. We hire based on finding people throughout the year that we think are going to be great fits. And they come on the summer, they get trained up. By the end of the fall, they're usually on projects. And by about March, we are dying for more capacity. You can't wait until May comes around and somebody graduates from college. Right? And that's just kind of the cycle. It follows every year. But yeah, and there have been times where, there was an economic event or a big federal contract that wound down or something like that. And I guess the one of those that sticks out was when we were 18 people, And we had one client decide not to renew at the last minute, and one client unexpectedly wind down, and our 4 summer hires had just started, like kind of all at the same time,
I
right?
think I got a call from you during that.
Yeah, I think you might have. And so I think we had like 10 of the 18 actually billing. Oh, and of course that was the quarter I also decided to stop billing and start, delegating and running the business full time. So yeah, that created a situation where we had a lot of capacity to do bench stuff.
Sure.
But we grew through it, and by the end of the year we had everyone on projects again.
I think that's the most exciting part about getting to the scale where you have, and I think you said you're about 150 people.
Yeah.
Have you sold a project where you've been really worried about, how are we going to staff it in the past year?
Not in the past year.
I know you're selling much bigger deals than you
Yeah.
used to, but it's such a different game when you have, it's just a critical mass that you hit where, wow, we can staff anything.
What's interesting is you run out of people for any given role, right? Like
That's
you realize, we have 6 people on the bench, but none of them can run a project.
Yeah.
And if we go sell a 3-person project, somebody's got to run that,
Yeah.
right? And that's when you
That's the
start
hardest
figuring
part,
out the
yeah.
juggle or who's ready to step up and
Yeah.
needs a promotion, even if that means you have to do what you were talking about before, pull them off of an
Yep.
existing project and have some difficult conversations and quite frankly probably give away some free work to make up for it.
Sure. We all like to think that we're just so awesome at coming in and waving our hands and saying these aren't the droids you're looking for.
Yeah.
But the reality is the free work happens a lot more than we care to admit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, particularly if it's our decision, right? If we
Yeah.
say that we need to change staffing for whatever reason, we've got to make that up to the client somehow.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, what does the team that runs Macedon look like today? How, and that includes you. How hands-on are you in that? And when I say running it, managing the logistics, managing the sales processes, managing escalations with customers, maybe handling difficult employees. Like, what's the team that manages that look like today?
So, assume you have any number of projects with a lead and a couple people under them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those get grouped into what we call programs. And a program could be all the projects at one customer, or a couple projects at a smaller customer and a couple projects at 3 other smaller customers,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be vertically targeted, like all of our government stuff rolls up to one program manager, right?
Okay.
And so then we have this layer of program managers that each have their hands in a handful of accounts,
Mm-hmm.
and they got there by being absolute rock stars at running individual projects, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that now they're the escalation point for those project managers that are under them.
And is there somebody that runs that program management team then?
Yeah, so those roll up to directors,
Okay.
right? And so each director has a couple program managers under them. And there's one director that has all of our architects under him, because architects cross projects in
Sure.
weird ways, and that wound up being a competency that's so depth-centered that we wanted it, all to live in one place.
Mm-hmm.
But other than him, program managers roll up to directors, and so at that point the director has a portfolio of accounts that are divided, kind of by region and vertical.
Mm-hmm.
And directors are running the company at that point, right? They're the ones that really need to answer the question when a program manager says, hey, I need 2 more people on this account and don't know where they're going to come from. It's the director that talks to the other directors and figures out, who from the master spreadsheet of staffing logistics can, be put on this account.
It's not on Appian, the logistics spreadsheet?
That's one of the few things we haven't moved to Appian yet. We do run most of our business on Appian, actually.
I've seen it. It's pretty impressive. It's enabled you to have a lot less overhead than you would otherwise to support the level of revenue that you've got. So the directors, talk a little bit about that role. Do they, if they need to escalate, do they go to you, or is there a managing director above them, or what does that look like?
Well, this is another place where they used to come to me, and then I realized that we need another level of management. So the directors, they kind of have a hybrid role. Everyone's a hybrid of multiple things at Macedon, whether that's that you're, developer, QA, and business analyst, or you're Scrum Master, project lead, and database expert. Everyone kind of wears multiple hats. We try to keep that as part of our startup-y culture that we never want to lose.
Mm-hmm.
So
Day Zero company is or
Exactly.
Day One company, as Jeff Bezos calls it.
Yeah. So directors are kind of half sales and half execution, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've got programs that roll up to them, but they're also the ones that are out there writing proposals and talking to prospects. And obviously they're the experts on our methodology and how we deliver and what we can deliver. So they're the ones that get to tell that story.
And how many of them are there? Not to...
Four.
Okay.
Yeah. So the directors roll up to one vice president, right? So he's got those handful of direct reports. Obviously, he also has sales responsibilities. Our Center of Excellence also rolls up to him, so it's the kind of the director and the architects that are under him. And so he's global vice president of professional services, right?
Okay.
Whatever it is we have to do for clients is his responsibility. And he has, whatever number of people to delegate that to as needed.
That role at level was one of the hardest jobs in the company.
Yes.
By the way. It's not for the faint of heart, but it's a rewarding job because you get to see more of the company than I would argue anybody else.
Yes, for sure.
But it's not without its challenges, for sure.
Yeah, no, and so that's Andy, and he's definitely the puppet master over all of our project execution. He reports to Mark, who's our COO, who then also oversees sales, HR, and a department that we call the Chief Customer Officer. Right?
Okay. Is that like a client success group?
Yeah, a client success group. And that is, independent of our actual project execution arm. So it's not that you're, going to whoever the highest person you can get a hold of on the ground boss is and saying, here's why this person is falling short, right? It's that you can come to someone outside of that hierarchy and say, here are some new directions we'd like to stretch our relationship with you in, and you can have someone actually strategize about that without it, being about, what's going on the ground specifically, right? So Tim is my Chief Customer Officer, and he's got one director under him, Stacy, who runs training, recruiting, and our entire methodology. So our templates, how we do Agile, all of those sorts of things, right? So she's very enablement focused. We call it delivery, which I know a lot of companies use as their term for their group that actually executes projects. But for us, delivery is how we execute projects. So again, she's independent of the actual hierarchy of people doing the work, but she has views into everyone's status reports and things like that, and can see things like, well, we have a centralized database of risks across the country across the company that we run on Appian actually. So everyone does their status reports by putting all of their hours and risks and issues and everything else that you would need into Appian, which then generates the PDF you need to send to the client every week. But then it also gives us behind the scenes great ways of cross-tabbing across projects, what the highest risks are, what risks occur most frequently, and those sorts of things, which then feed back into where we might need to make methodology changes to address those at a different point in the cycle.
How long did you go before you realized that you needed that role? Because that's the kind of role that historically I pushed off as long as I could, and once we had it, I wish I had done it at the beginning.
And that's exactly what we did. It was in the last 18 months probably when we got to 80 or so people that we realized just like you need architects that are that technical point of guidance that can span multiple projects. You also need to centralize how you run projects.
Yep. Now I remember bringing on our first project manager at level and people grumbling about it.
Yeah.
And then literally 4 weeks later, we're trying to hire 3 more because everybody has had a little taste of this and they're like, wow, the world runs so much better when somebody who actually knows how to do this stuff is doing it.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that, and I was like, oh, yeah, John finally gave in and hired project managers at that gauge.
Yeah, and I was opposed.
Yeah.
I was very opposed to it, and like so many other things though, when you get over your ego and you say, you know what, I was wrong, let me give this a shot, you realize like, wow, the company is way better as a result of this.
Yeah, for sure. I think some of that is, I had seen a model work without that in a previous life at Rosenfeld, for example, and thought, well, if it worked for them, it can work for us too. And seeing your experience actually accelerated that for me, where you told me you were seeing a lot less fires once you had someone overseeing methodology and being more proactive about preventing them and those sorts of things, which is another thing that is easy to spot at we have one project level, and then when you have like a bunch of projects going in parallel, you realize it's nobody's job to even look for that anymore, right? And so it became somebody's job.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about this, but your philosophy is obviously make sure you're the best at Appian in the world.
Yeah.
Then you figured out how to be highly profitable with it. So it feels like the first step was, I want to make money, obviously, but I need to be the best in the world. Then you figure out, how do I optimize this? And we haven't really talked about it, but your margins are phenomenal.
Nice.
And that extreme profitability has allowed you to make bets on growth hires that enable you to push to that next level. Is this accurate? Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't talked about already about that order of operations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was certainly more accurate, I would say, during the middle of our 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
Things were actually fairly easy early on because I was actually more self-employed than running a business, right?
Gotcha.
And I could obviously bill at a really high rate because I personally knew Appian really well and could write any sort of code I needed with it. And when you're the only person on payroll and you're putting all that money in the bank.
Well, it's easy for you to convince people because you wrote the engine.
Right, yeah, I was also a great sales guy for myself, right?
Yeah.
So we got to put money in the bank, pretty early, and then use that to hire people kind of at our own pace, which was great. So we've actually been profitable, since the beginning. I think we saw kind of a peak profitability when we were just running that same model, and we were 30 or 40 people and didn't need to add any of this overhead yet.
And for the folks listening, when Austin talks about extreme profitability, I've got a guest coming on in a couple of weeks here who runs an investment bank, and they helped Austin out with some strategy work, and their bank does a lot of work with a lot of different services companies, and he said, I did not believe Austin's numbers until he literally opened up the books and showed them to me, because nobody runs this profitably. And again, I think it's hard to overstate the strategic value of that kind of profitability, because you can afford to take advantage of things as they come. Now, at Level, we took a very different approach, which was let's raise some money, let's go chase growth, and we were able to grow very fast. But at the same time, you don't have the operational flexibility, and you're constantly thinking about raising money in that kind of a model. Whereas someone who says, you know what, I'm committed to these margins, I'm going to make these margins, you lose flexibility in the one sense that you can't take quite as many risks, but in the long run, you can take far more risks and keep a 20-person bench when things start to head a little bit south, because you've got some cushion. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember one of the founders at Appian gave me a book by the CEO of Bear Stearns that was all about this, Memos from the Chairman.
Okay.
Right, and the theory there was basically run your company as efficiently as possible, right? Reuse paper clips in your back office and that sort of stuff, and use your money to hire talent when you find it, not when you need it.
Yeah.
Right. No, because someday you'll need it.
I think that's great advice. We had met a partner during the Level days, and very accomplished former CEO of a couple of large consulting companies. He had come in to this company, and he said, we're going to stop chasing revenue first. If we chase profits first, then the revenue growth will follow. And I do think there's something to be said for either model, but it's one of those fascinating decisions that you make strategically when you think about what are we going to go out there and do. And to me, the biggest challenge with raising money and then chasing growth is that you're constantly raising money.
Sure.
And as long as it's up rounds, then that's fine.
Yes.
But there's challenges. Are you better served running a company or raising money? And obviously, a lot of companies pursue the path that raise money. There wouldn't be this huge VC market if it weren't the case. But it's one of those things that's interesting, and obviously it's worked very well for you. So.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey, and it's been interesting watching both the revenue and the profit numbers fluctuate over time. And I remember when I did engage with that bank, they had me do gap audits and some of that stuff. And the reason I did that was because I still felt like we were a garage band, right? We were about a $8 to $10 million company at the time. And I figured I've got to be doing something wrong, right? There's got to be something that I'm just missing, like big picture, because all I have are developers. We have no other departments in the company, and that, at $10 million, that can't be the right way to run a business anymore. Like, it feels like it's working, but I kind of feel like there's just like something I'm not seeing, right? And so I engaged with Andy, and he just, kind of laid out what he sees at various, professional services firms. And we actually did, make a lot of changes based on that experience. And when we needed overhead, at least I had some context for, this is the kind of thing that Andy told me about a couple of years ago, that now I finally need someone who does X full time, and I understand, like, he told me, what I should have been spending on that person. I kept saying, well, I think I should be spending zero. I just don't get it, right? And so now we do have a mature back office. We do have a lot of office space.
Sure.
We, in the last 2 years, became an Appian reseller, and we're able to add a big sales team that can now go out and chase deals for us, because we had some money put in the bank from those early profitability days when I think we kept overhead super low a little longer than maybe we should have gotten away with.
Sure. No, well, hindsight's always 20/20, but it's worked out well.
Yeah.
For sure. Maybe you could speak a little bit to just how you think about culture. I was at an event in New York that this UK group put on, and they had a fascinating presentation, but one of the things they said that really stuck with me is that the only competitive long-term advantage that any company has is their corporate culture. And I think that's a profound statement, and the more I reflect on it, the more they're right. And that's in any business, they're saying. In the services business, I think it's even a stronger statement.
Sure.
And you guys have a great culture. Can you maybe talk about how deliberate the culture is, what the thought process is, and maybe just speak to what the culture is that I'm talking about? For instance, you've got a little banner for each college that you've hired from, in the order that you hired them.
Yes.
So those kind of things build and become very important in the company's culture through the years.
Yeah, we definitely think that stuff is important. And I've heard similar quotes, like I think it was Peter Drucker who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think it's absolutely true. And the easiest bottom line way to see that it's true is, if you can't attract and retain talent, you'll never be great at anything, and you'll never scale, right? Particularly in our business, where literally all we have are people, right? And so my goal was always attract and retain the best talent. I wanted to go compete with Google for, guys that had 3.9 GPAs at Chapel Hill and whatever. Yeah, and gals. We actually have quite a lot of female engineers and females in other management roles.
I believe you guys won the diversity award.
We did a couple years ago. Yeah, and actually I think we have quite a few new women coming on board this summer.
That's great.
And we've actually had them since we were pretty early. I think Rachel Rader was employee number 5.
Wow, that's great.
Yep.
I just wanted to make sure, because you've said he a lot, but I know the truth because I've seen the company.
Yes. But no, culture is really important to us. So I sum it all up as work hard, play hard, right? We're hiring people who have succeeded at difficult academic institutions, and you don't get that, degree and that GPA without having put your nose in a book and studied and built cool things at 1 a.m. in the engineering lab, right? And we all loved geeking out and solving problems, right? And I ask people, like, what's the coolest thing you've ever built? And when did you realize that you wanted to be an engineer, right? And they tell me that they just love playing with stuff and tinkering, right? And then eventually that led to software, which is just kind of a more abstract way to do the same thing, right? So I embrace that, if you want people that are going to get the best results, you need smart people that want to work and want to solve problems and want to be creative, right? But the play hard side is also important. And I would say we're all nerds, right? We all have computer science degrees and that sort of stuff, right?
Not me, but...
No, you're actually not me either, oddly enough. But that's another topic where you and I met in a computer science class, and then neither one of us wound up getting computer science degrees, but we both run software companies. It's we geek out on things like Star Wars movie marathons at the office, and we've got 2 kegs on tap at all times in a medical grade refrigerator with a sign on the front that says absolutely not beer. And when the guys came to install the refrigerator, they said, "Are you doctors?" And we just kind of looked at them and said, "Why would you say that?" And they said, "Well, this is medical grade refrigerating equipment to like super cool body parts." And we were like, "No, we're just going to put kegs in it." Right?
That's great.
And so we
built a pretty, I seem to recall in your office seeing a very well thought out patio and outdoor area.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think those little touches make people really appreciate the company.
Yeah, I think so too. And, we got a commercial grade grill, and we grill a bunch of burgers and hot dogs and stuff on Fridays when the weather's nice and stuff like that. The colleges thing is interesting. We obviously love colleges. We recruit directly out of them, right? And so we wound up putting a plaque, basically like a 5-inch by 5-inch plaque of each school's logo.
That's cool.
Across our break room, and I think we have probably 50 of them now. And we did it by looking at the roster and the order we had hired people in, right? And every now and then we get a new one. University of Virginia obviously is first, since it's first. But yeah, we celebrate that. We themed our entire headquarters after Harry Potter, right? So all the hallways are named after streets in the book, and we actually had street signs made in Great Britain with a logo we designed.
So you're talking about the street signs on the buildings
Yeah.
for each of the roads. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
great.
so we have those in each hallway, and if you're standing at whatever intersection the Leaky Cauldron is at in the Harry Potter books, then that's the name of the conference room at that intersection in our office.
Very cool. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Before I do, is there anything else about Macedon that we should talk about that we missed here?
I think we've hit it all pretty well. It's been a wild ride, but it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. So shifting gears from investing in your own company, how many investments have you made in other people's companies through the years here?
Probably about a dozen.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah.
We're both friends with Scott Lean.
Yeah, Scott's awesome.
And you invested in his very successful startup, GrandPad, and I recently interviewed him, and we talked a little bit about, he told me you were his favorite investor, not strategic, because he's got some very, very strategic investors who have written huge checks.
Yeah.
But he said of everybody who's ever invested in his company or that he's worked with, that you were one of his favorites, willing to help, willing to be a thought leader, not just calling when you're bored, but like legitimately interested, but not getting into too many details, and then willing to write follow-on checks, asking good questions, supporting him when he needs it. What do you think is the biggest mistake that individual investors make? Because there's a lot of shitty individual investors too.
Yeah, I think the best principle that I've heard, and the one that I've seen, play out well, is you're betting on jockeys, not horses, right? And it's about buying into someone you think is a star that can go execute their idea. Because anyone can show you a 20-slide PowerPoint deck about how they're going to be the next Starbucks or Google, right?
Or Uber. I don't know if you've seen their investment pitch, but it actually was really good.
Yeah. And of course now their stock is public, and I wouldn't touch it these days.
No, it's toxic.
Yeah. But, I think a lot of people can be coached to put together that deck, right? But if you bet on someone who has run companies before, or has been a product manager, or has, one of the startups I invest in, their president used to be the chief marketing officer at Hooters, right? It's like a 500 stop chain, right? Which I assume most people have heard of. Well, you don't run across people with that resume every day, right? And when he's out there selling like a consumer product, right? And he can say, I get this industry. I was chief marketing officer for 500 store chain. That carries some weight, right? And when I've got to bet on who's going to go succeed next time, his resume is one I want to bet on, right? And Scott Lean was the same way. He had done great stuff at a lot of big banks, a lot of fintech, and those sorts of things. And I actually met him when we were both co-investors in a company he used to run. Scott is just phenomenal. He's the guy you want running your startup for sure.
Yeah, his success story is so inspirational. They're doing so well. But it's a little easier to be a good investor in an extremely well-run company like GrandPad. What is the biggest mistake CEOs make with investors, with good investors, not with bad investors?
I think you have an interesting class of CEOs that you've already filtered down to at that point, right? And that's CEOs that took outside capital particularly early. And I think my biggest worry always when I give someone money is that they're going to spread it too thin and come back for more too quickly, right? And that they got that money easily, and therefore they're going to be Santa Claus spending it.
Sure.
right?
Buying cappuccino machines and not reusing the paper clips in the back office.
Exactly. So I give them that book, right? But no, I mean, I think that's the biggest, balancing working capital and marketing and product development and all of those sorts of things, and still running like a startup, right? Like, I feel like you've got to always run like you have no money.
That is very true. I think that I heard that that's the real reason that the Japanese automakers were ultimately so successful is coming out of World War II. They had no infrastructure, they had no money, a completely decimated country, and they had to invent Kanban, and they had to invent just in time. They literally had to reinvent the way that you build cars.
Yeah.
And now you look, and the wealthy German manufacturers and American manufacturers are adopting those same approaches to building things. I think that scarcity creates the context for some very good invention.
Yeah, they always say necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Sure. And I am all out of whiskey, so I'm going to leave you with a question that I know you can talk about for a minute.
Okay.
And then I'm going to go grab a bottle for us.
Cool.
When you think back on why you've done well, not just at Macedon, you've always done well in your career. You've had some very good investments that you've made. What are the top 3 attributes that have served you well when you reflect on that?
It's an interesting question. I think there's a diversity of thought that underlies it all, right? And so I've always read a lot of books, right? And actually, John, I've gotten a lot of book recommendations from you over the years, and I think I've probably given you a lot too. But I try to read a book a week, and some of those are about business, and some are about sports or history or sci-fi or whatever. But definitely just being intellectually curious and wanting to dive into things and always learn more and come into the next situation with more context. I've also made plenty of mistakes throughout the course of my life, which...
Those are the best teachers.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, those aren't the parts of my resume you chose to highlight in this talk, but truthfully, just trying to learn as much as I could from each mistake or from each, borderline success, right? Each single that could have been a double or a triple, right? And say, okay, well, we scraped by here, but what are 10 things we could have done better so that next time we don't lose? I was the captain of the debate team in high school. Actually, your brother was my debate partner all those decades ago. And we actually won a couple of state championships back in those days. And, whenever we lost or had a close win that, we didn't feel good about, but somehow the judge believed an argument we didn't believe ourselves, we would just mercilessly go, replay the debate and say, well, what could we have said differently here? What could we have started
Let's talk about that
better?
for a second. Did that come from you and Brian, or did that come from Ron Richards, your coach, who we both admire, obviously?
Ron's a really interesting guy. Ron definitely taught me a lot, and I feel like I got some of my best arguments from him because he saw things from just a completely different perspective than everyone else, and it was like almost the conspiracy theory perspective, right? But if there's like a not crazy version of that, where like the guy tells you the conspiracy theory and you're like, if you had told me the world was flat, I wouldn't have believed you. But when you're telling me like, this is what really happens on Wall Street, I can't poke too many holes in your story, right? So that was Ron Richards, and I think we got a lot of arguments where we would stand up and say something, and the other team would be like, I can't believe you just said that, but I also can't refute it, right?
That's a great place to be.
Yeah, that was awesome. Or in business, right? Like when you're selling something and you can make a pitch that has those characteristics, right? And that's when you know that you've got your competition backed into a corner that they don't even know they're in because they're not in the room when you say that, right? But I think the work ethic part of it, where Brian and I just did not want to lose ever. And, some of it is stuff you hear about, guys like Peyton Manning, right, who will put together a tape of every interception he's thrown in his life and watch every one of them and say...
Bill Belichick is another.
Yeah, Bill Belichick does that now, right? And I actually have a funny Belichick story that I'll tell you later. Okay. Not that I've ever met him, but I used him as an analogy once in a way that I thought was really powerful. But, that's what I've always heard about work ethic, right, is that it's not about, like, how many weights did Peyton Manning lift to be like the top quarterback in the league, right?
Sure.
Or whatever it was, right? To him, work ethic, and I'm sure he lifted enough, right? But work ethic was that mental game, right? That no one's ever going to out-prepare him, and that whenever he sees a situation, he's going to be able to see that path to victory because he's going to know if this is what the defense is throwing at me, this is what their weakness is, right? Mm-hmm. And that was how Brian and I used to prep for every round. And ultimately, I mean, we wound up winning times that we never should have.
Sure.
Right?
It's amazing how that happens.
Yeah, and I try to do the same thing in business. You know, like I said, sales is the most obvious example, right? But trying to convince some recruit to come to your startup instead of going to Google is actually the same thing.
Yeah. You need to think through what might they say back to me. What have I heard before? What resonated that I've said before?
Or convincing an employee not to quit or to unquit.
So, what things you learned along the way surprised you the most about business? I'm putting you on the spot because that's a very direct question.
Yeah. So I think business is an interesting combination of the rational and the irrational.
Okay.
Right. And you know, we grow up.
But let me before you get into that, because I want to hear that.
Yeah.
What's more natural to you, the rational or the irrational?
Well, I'm a computer scientist without a computer science degree, so. Actually, that statement alone as a contradiction might tell you that there's no good answer, right? Yeah. But no, I like to think that, you know, as someone who was into, you know, the mathematical proofs that underlie computer science,
sure,
that if things are rational and add up, that's always easier to process.
Yeah, that seems like things that you, because I feel like I'm better at processing the irrational and kind of reacting to crazy things. We get along great, and maybe it's because we see two different parts of the world.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, there have been plenty of times throughout the years that I've called you and said, John, the craziest thing just happened. Like, why did this person say this? And you were like, oh, yeah, they were thinking about it this way and you were thinking about it that way. I'm like, oh, that makes sense now that you said it, right?
Yeah. No, I've always admired that about you, the ability to break things down into something very rational. I don't know, for me, sometimes I feel like it's intellectual laziness on my part. But there's also, I've seen people who do it very well and seeing the success that they've had of being able to take things and say, this seems completely fucked and irrational, but we're humans, so why are we actually doing this, and try to break down why it is. But I think that is more art than science, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's interesting because in the context of a debate, you can just point out that something is irrational, and that scores you points, right? Because who's going to vote for it once that's been pointed out?
Yeah, but when your client is firing off something really irrational, that it doesn't matter that you're right.
Right, or when someone is going to make a decision based on, you know, who they played golf with and not who told the better story in the room, right? Or when you know that you've got stakeholders that voted for the other technology and they were outvoted, and now you've got to execute the project and win their approval anyway, and they're just looking to say, I told you so.
Yep.
Right? And so there are a lot of situations like that you have to navigate where building the best software isn't about the ones and zeros. You know, I've had people say, well, how could you have any competitive advantage? Someone tells you what software to build and you build it, your competitor would have done the same thing, right? Like you either did or didn't build the right software, right? And it turns out that there's just a lot of gray.
Absolutely. So what has been your best investment to date outside of Macedon? And I don't need specific names, just talk about an investment that you've made outside that you thought worked out really well for you.
Well, I mean, there's the time I bought Amazon for $2 a share in 1996, but unfortunately I sold it for about $4 a share later that year.
I sold a bunch of Red Hat shares at $19. So they sold to IBM at 190. I think.
Yeah, I think so. They might have split in between. I can't remember.
Sure.
So we've all had a few of those. There's an interesting set of side businesses that you and I got into over the last couple of decades that I think we're mostly out of now. But we were both really turned on by real estate during the boom. And there was a time that I bought my first townhouse when I was 24 or whatever, and it doubled in value in 3 years, right?
When we had a mutual friend, Poya Safa, who did extremely well with just buying townhouses in DC.
I bet he has quite a collection at this point.
I always wonder. I see him on Facebook. I text with him every couple of years, but it's usually after a few of these. So.
No, I mean anyone that bought and held is fine, right? Yeah. But markets have a funny way of shaking out a lot of money over time. I mean, as far as buying into small companies that no one's heard of, right? That's probably what you were looking for.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Not
the call options you bought on Merck.
Right.
Before a drug was approved. Or,
yeah, the 15 shares of Intel that my parents gave me at high school graduation that turned out well.
Yeah.
I've had a couple that I think are going to be real home runs, and actually, they both involved you. Level your company, right? When you had that idea really early on, I again, bet on the jockey, and I suspect, Level's even bigger than Mastodon, and started 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. So we had a 5-year head start, and you guys are bigger. So the fact that I bought into your company there, I think, was a good move on my part.
I don't disagree with that.
But then you and I have a mutual friend, Matt, who has a side project where he runs a restaurant chain that he was involved in early, and he got both of us into pretty early. The restaurant's called Dirt. And,
I love it. I eat clean myself, and Jeff has agreed to do the podcast. We've had trouble nailing down the time to do it because he's obviously running an explosively growing company. But I went up and visited the location in DC, and it was awesome to see. I think they doubled the ticket size, the record ticket in a given day within like 3 days of opening the restaurant of what in any of the locations in Florida, which we're already doing very well.
Right. Like when your chain starts in South Beach, you got to think that it's setting records that are going to be hard to break anywhere else, right? And then the first week, the DC, store is breaking them, and I actually think I went the week after you, and I think that concept has real legs, and that definitely could be the next, Sweet Green or Shake Shack. One of those concepts that every major city needs a handful of.
I agree, and then obviously GrandPad that we talked about with Scott Lane. You were at a position to invest. I didn't, and I'm kicking myself now.
Yeah, I think I was in that early. It might have been the first round, and I was at my parents' house for Thanksgiving, and I actually saw a GrandPad commercial on like CNN or something. Yeah. And I was like, I know that. I got a piece of that company, right? Scott's like a phenomenal CEO, right?
Yeah. It's great. They're in Target. They're in Best
Buy. I think it might have been a Target, like a commercial that was kind of repping both them and Target over that partnership.
Yeah. So what he talks a lot about this in the podcast. Consumer Cellular picked up on his solution, and all of the cellular companies have really struggled to connect with the greatest generation, or those that are 80, 90, 100 years old. There's just no compelling reason to sell to these folks, or there's no compelling reason for these folks to use the tech. And in the podcast, Scott talks about little silly things like when you get to 90 years old, you lose the oil in your skin. And
you can't touch the button.
Every touch button reacts to that oil, and so they had to re-engineer for that. And then there's just a whole bunch of little things that nobody ever looked at this segment of the population. Right. And to Scott's point, they've got the most disposable income and the most disposable time of any demographic. Now,
and they're living longer.
And they're living longer. So it's interesting to me, and it's great to see somebody like that achieve that kind of success, because you could see it in the early going, like, this guy's got a great idea, he really understands his market, but it still takes so much luck to get over that finish line.
It does, and one of the things I've always loved about that story is Scott is just so personally invested in that concept, right? He has a chief gerontologist on staff, right? Which isn't a title I had ever heard of.
At one point, his youngest employee was 16 and his oldest was 114.
114. I wonder if he has any systems that cap people's age at 99.
No, they don't seem to have that. He and I were out one night in Newport Beach, and
it's a decent town.
Not a bad town. And we run in. We're at this bar. It's a really fun country dive bar, and there's this 90-year-old guy is in there like dancing with all these ladies, and Scott knew some of the people who knew him, and instantly Scott just like flocked right to this guy and like wanted to talk to him for 20 minutes, is buying him drinks. Like he legitimately loves people of that age and feels like his generation has let them down, and I think that drives a lot of his success, because he does actually genuinely care for his customers.
And that wasn't Warren Buffett, right? That was just a random guy.
That was just some random guy wearing a big belt buckle.
That's awesome. That is so Scott.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna again shift gears here a bit and move over to sports because that's something you and I talk about.
Yeah, for sure.
We are long-suffering Redskin fans.
We are,
and we're coming to folks from Dallas. Your home in Dallas. First off, what do you think your expectation is for a record next year?
Ooh, that's a tough one. A lot of that depends on who the quarterback is, but I feel like 6-10 has kind of been about where we've
7-9 has been my default answer.
And I feel like how many times have they underachieved your 7-9?
Yeah, exactly. Very often. So the draft, I didn't follow the draft personally, but from what I understand, we didn't embarrass ourselves, which is saying a lot.
I think it looked very competent. I think we had about the number 15 pick, and I think there's a player that in previous years we would have traded up to 3 or 4 to get, and we wound up getting him at 15.
That's great.
And not having to spend any assets to do it. So.
Well, here's hopefully our owner is finally figuring it out. I don't know. I'm a little wary after the years of just awful missing expectations, but
well, maybe he's learned by listening to your podcast on how to pivot while you're running a business.
He's one of the millions listening. I'm sure
he is.
What is the worst part about being a Skins fan in Dallas?
I actually, I haven't run into that many issues, oddly enough.
Well, so to me, I've spent a lot of time in Dallas, not as much as you, but I've probably spent 9 months of my life living here.
Yeah, that's about what I spent before I moved here.
For me, the worst part was they don't give a shit about us. Like
it's a one-way rivalry.
We fixate on Dallas, and they just couldn't give a shit.
No, they're more worried about Philly. Yeah.
And I don't blame them, but still, like that. I don't know. That just upsets me.
It's interesting, right? Because I've definitely gone to Eagles games wearing my Redskins gear and had stuff thrown at me. And in Dallas, people just drink a beer with you if you're wearing a Skins jersey. They don't care.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
This is a tough one because there's a lot of candidates.
All right.
What's the single biggest mistake of Snyder's tenure?
Let's see. I can't say buying the team because I suspect he's actually made a lot of money doing it.
I think that is true.
It
could be Hainsworth.
I feel like we need categories here, right? You can talk about
Adam Archuleta was a nice mistake.
That was record-setting.
Dana Stubblefield.
You've got a couple coaching hires that were
Jim
beyond question. Horny for Zorny, right?
Chasing Schottenheimer out after 1-8-8 season.
Yeah, that was good. 8-8. By the way, that season started 0-5.
Yeah.
Right, and then got to 8-8, which had never been done before.
But then Spurrier became available.
Of course,
worked out so well for him.
Yes. You could look at drafting success, right, and trading an entire draft for RG3. If you were to score that one at home, that probably set us back 5 years.
Absolutely. Although it did give us one season.
We had that one phenomenal year. You and I went to that playoff game against Seattle.
That was a lot of fun. You're also a big baseball fan. In fact, you were probably into baseball before I was. Can you comment on football versus baseball for you, and kind of how the two have played different roles in your life through the years, or how you've evolved on the way that you view the two?
Yeah, it's interesting. My dad is a big baseball guy, and he grew up in Brooklyn in the 50s, right? So he was into a scene where I think baseball was everything, and then he raised me on it. At that point, it was the Phillies, and eventually moved to Atlanta in middle school and was a Braves fan for a while. But baseball is very everyday, right? Like you literally get 1 day off a month, right? And I think that's a really interesting metaphor for what we do in business, right? Because you really can't afford to have a bad day, right? You've got to bring your A game, 162 games in a row. And it's interesting, you get to the end of the season, and you have teams missing the playoffs by 1 game, right? You say, well, over 162 games, how could the other team have been 1% better and kept my team out of the playoffs, right? But it happens every year, right? And you could look at any game early in the season and say, oh, if we had just not made a defensive error in that game, we'd be in the playoffs right now.
So fighting for every inch literally matters.
It does.
In the marathon.
Right, and it's interesting that football is only 16 games, and sometimes we lose sight of that, right? And even though, again, you miss the playoffs by 1 game there, it seems like, well, we could say we could have done 30 things better in that game, right? And it's almost like one game means less in football, even though it should mean so much more.
That's very true.
Right. The other thing I think is interesting is the preparation, right? In football, you know your schedule, and going into any game, you have like 6 days to do nothing but prepare for that opponent, right? And know exactly what offense they run and what what play they're going to want to run on first down every time, and how often they run the ball, and who you specifically are matching up against, and what all their tendencies are. You have like a really big amount of time to just prep for that like one individual matchup on that one day. And you still have teams that beat other teams like 50-7.
Yeah.
Usually teams beating our team 50-7.
Sure.
And it's interesting how like the skill gap somehow seems to overcome that knowledge gap. Right.
Well, the other interesting dynamic that I haven't really wrapped my head around is your pitcher changes every game.
Yeah.
And you change pitcher within the game. And
yeah.
That strategy of playing, but to your point, you've got less time to prepare for that, but that dynamic you don't even think about in football. You're not like,
no.
We're going to have this quarterback at the beginning, and then
right.
we're going to go here, and then we're going to switch to this quarterback, and then depending on where we are, we might go with this quarterback, but then we have to think about we can't use him tomorrow.
Right, yeah, there's no tomorrow in football, right? In fact, the thing that the defense can best hope to do is get you down to your second quarterback.
And there's no doubleheader, right? A doubleheader changes everything.
Oh, well, yeah. Right, because you're out of pitchers by the end of that day.
Yeah,
absolutely. Even though you go 10 to begin with.
It's as I get older, that baseball becomes a lot more fascinating to me. Just we only have a minor league team in Charlotte, but I still really enjoy the games. It's a lot of fun just seeing it. So as you're a UVA fan, I think you mentioned it earlier. My dad and my brother and my aunt all went to UVA. I didn't, but I still like to follow UVA from behind. I like to poke holes and talk a little shit every now and again.
Yeah, I mean, at least you got into Duke, so.
Which is a sore subject this year. But as a UVA fan, which team are you most excited about? I mean, there's one obvious.
Like lacrosse or?
Well, there's an obvious one, basketball. But after basketball, like, what are you most interested in? Like, which of the teams do you follow the most after the back? And it hasn't always been basketball, has it? Like, for a while, football probably seemed like a better path.
Yeah, I mean, UVA's definitely had a lot of ups and downs, particularly in football. When I was there, we were actually really good. It was in kind of the Aaron Brooks era.
Thomas Jones was there?
Yeah, Thomas Jones went to some Peach Bowls. We're kind of a top 15-ish team. But, we definitely had some lean years since then. And then things seem to be heading in the right direction. We beat South Carolina in a bowl game last year. Finished, well above where we were picked in the ACC. I don't think we're going to beat Clemson anytime soon, but
that's so good. As an ACC fan, you have to love that there's a team that dominant.
That's not Florida State, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because when we were growing up, it's like, Florida State's lost, one game in 12 years.
And we all thought when they brought Miami and Virginia Tech in, that
those
two teams were
that was the class of the conference, I think football definitely could take a step forward.
No love for lacrosse? Even though that's your best team throughout the last 20 years?
I feel like we're in the national championship like next week in lacrosse or something.
You might be. I haven't looked this season.
But no, basketball will be interesting. I always said none of my teams had ever really won a title in anything until a couple weeks ago.
Sure.
And then, of course, we lost like our top 5 players or something. So it'll be interesting.
My son told me about that because he said Duke recharged. And not that they found another Zion, because you don't going to find many Zions.
Right.
He said they got 3 top 10 picks in the year. And he's like, UVA didn't. And I was like, I am going to go out on a limb and say UVA will be better next year than Duke. Because to me, in college basketball, it's all about the coach. And Tony Bennett clearly, and nothing against Coach K, he's been doing it for a very long time. He might be past his prime. I mean, he could be. He had 4 guys who, at different points during the season, were talked about as being top 10 picks. Yeah. And yet didn't have one guy who could shoot free throws, over 58%.
Right.
And again, it's hard to judge because it was a really fun season and we did great. But it's also like not winning. The expectations are so high when you beat a team by 68 points and you beat a number 1 team by 36 points. You have a legitimate expectation of doing better than we did. But that's the reality of college basketball. Like you lose
Yeah.
once and you're out. I mean,
And the interesting thing about basketball to me, and you're right, the coach is worth a lot, but team chemistry counts for a lot too.
Absolutely.
You've only got 5 guys on the court at any one time.
Yeah.
And if they're 5 all-stars or 5, get me the ball guys, and the Lakers prove every year that doesn't work, right? And I think Duke had a little bit of that.
well, and Florida State almost beat Duke in the ACC tournament.
They beat us.
And they beat you, and they play Duke tough every year. And this year, their approach was so different. Duke had 4 players that scored 80% of our points, and 7 players that scored 100% of our points. Florida State had 2 starting lineups that they were just
Their leading scorer came off the bench.
Yeah. It was amazing to see, and that's almost harder to deal with. And that's why I feel like a Tony Bennett, who's at the point in his career where I just feel like he's hit his stride, where Kay might have been 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I would take the coaching over the recruitment any day. And you can look at UVA. You had Al Groh was your coach. He had some of the best. You could build some of the best pro teams in the history of the NCAA's from UVA players, and they didn't win a bowl game during that time.
Right. No. Yeah. We had left tackles going in the top 10 every draft, and guys like Heath Miller.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's been one of the best tight ends of all time. Redefines the position.
And we go 7 and 5.
Yeah. Exactly. So, so Austin, you were. We talked a little bit about the role I might have played in your development, but you were also very influential in my personal development. And you mentioned you had invested in my Startup Rewards Summit. Although we achieved success in customer acquisition and within the Apple ecosystem, and we learned a ton, we weren't making money. And you encouraged me very early on when it became clear that what we were doing, although we had success on this measure, we weren't successful in the measure that matters, making money. You encouraged me very early on to start a consulting company to pay the bills. And ultimately, the success of that business led to us shutting down the Rewards Summit.
Yeah, I remember that.
And you invested in that new company, so it wasn't
double down on that.
But you're obviously still here, friends with me, and having this interview. So, was there a guiding principle you were thinking about when you gave me that advice? Because again, for folks, like, you put some money into a company, you put more money into it, and then you say, well, why don't you go do this because you're better at this, even though it might make my investment worth 0. That's a hard piece of advice to give. So what was the thought process at that time?
I mean, basically, I saw I was making money and you weren't, and I just wanted to help you.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. But actually, some of it was what I had seen the Appian guys do, and they had a profitable services business, and they plowed that money into a product. And today, obviously, they're a product company, but they were able to avoid taking capital for a really long time because the two roughly offset each other.
Yeah.
And
our problem was there was an imbalance where they didn't offset each other.
Right. Well, yeah. Sure. There were a couple of logistical challenges there, but I remember you had a lot of great product ideas at the time, and my kind of goal for you was run a consulting company that's profitable, and then use that money to fund all your product ideas. Don't pay any taxes because you have no net profit across the portfolio.
Sure.
And then you wouldn't need money from me every time.
So it was self-preservation.
Yeah, to an extent.
So that was obviously for Chris and me game-changing advice, because we were very focused on the product. And when I went to Chris, I was like, I want Austin, who you were probably our biggest investor at the time. I was like, Austin was like, just start a consulting company, funnel the profits over here. Not funnel, that sounds nefarious.
Reality.
Fund this with that. And then there was a point where it was like, to do what we need to do with this consulting company, we can't do this anymore. And you were very supportive. Scott was very supportive because he was the other big investor. All the investors were very supportive, and we were very lucky. When I asked Scott about it, what he talked about was just the transparency that we had, and the fact that we clearly didn't just give up on day one. Like, we're going to try this, we're going to try that. Like, I think that those are all things that people need to keep in mind. I think that your investors will support you as long as you're transparent with them and you explain to them this is what's going on and this is why, and if you have a personal connection. And we were always very careful at Reward Summit, and even at NextGrid I was very careful at. I need to talk to my investors, regularly. I need to let them know what's going on, because if they don't hear what's going on, and Scott talked about an investment he had made where, the minute he wires the money, he doesn't hear anything, and then the next thing he hears is 18 months later, we're shutting the company down.
I've had a few of those, yeah.
So, very interesting. So what, obviously Appian caught your imagination very early. What in the technology world excites you the most these days? Is there anything you've got your eye on, or are you so busy with Appian that you're not really looking around at what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of been heads down lately. I think the biggest trend out there is just disintermediation, right? For centuries, things were kind of done the same way, and like the major innovation of any given decade would be like, we can store food in a can now, right? And now we live in an age where like in any given month, a 200-year-old industry can be turned on its head by an app that like some kid built in his basement, right? And like if you fast forward 10 years and dozens or hundreds of industries have been turned on their head, right? What does the world look like once that's happened, right? And there are a lot of implications, right? Are there a lot of companies that now need a lot less employees because, well, either robots are doing their job or the equivalent, right? Like travel agent's job just doesn't exist anymore, right?
Yep.
And what's the next industry like that, right? Blockbuster cashier's job doesn't exist anymore, right?
Sure.
It's interesting if you just play it forward and you say, well, what percentage of like brick and mortar could we afford to get rid of before we would feel the impact in some other way? Right? I don't know the answer to that, and I suspect by 100 years from now, the answer is going to be we got rid of all of it. But what the path looks like from here to there, from kind of a macro
I think
society,
100 years from now, none of the jobs that exist today will exist.
Yeah, pretty much. But you couldn't have said that in previous centuries, right? Like you always needed dudes to run trains and
But it was
whatever.
probably fairly accurate, because there were 100 years before trains were invented, nobody even knew what a train was, so you couldn't have predicted that there was a train operator.
Right. Well, there weren't cars either, so you didn't have things like roads. You just drove horses.
Well, and even 10 years ago, there was no such thing as a social media specialist.
Right.
And there is now.
Now it's actually a highly paid job.
It's a highly paid job, and if you find one that's good, you keep
Yeah.
them. So, interesting. What keeps you awake at night about the macro economy right now?
That I don't have anything specific to put my finger on, right? Other than like trade war, we're living in an era of like no unemployment, relatively low interest rates, things like the trade balance, improving over where they've been in previous decades, a stock market that is usually making new highs if it's not taking a couple month pause. Something's got to be growing somewhere that we don't know about beyond just, what we're importing from China on a daily basis.
Gotcha.
And it kind of feels like a 1987 moment, right, where no one can kind of put their finger on why
we don't know where
crashed.
Yeah, we don't know where the black swan's coming.
Yeah,
but we know that something's coming.
Well, it's just been too long since we've had one, right?
Absolutely. So, what programming language are you going to suggest to your daughters to learn, or has Peyton already fired up a compiler?
That's interesting. I've always liked C++. I wouldn't recommend building anything in it, but if you're going to learn something, I like that you can learn all the object-oriented concepts, but you still need to learn how memory actually works. I think I see a lot of kids come out of school these days with a Java background that were just brought up in a world where you can assume you have unlimited resources and therefore write code that, is, we'll say, inefficient.
Interesting. That was the last answer I expected. I don't disagree with it. So basically what you're saying is learn a language that lets you learn more about the programming.
Yeah, you need to know kind of what a computer does and how a language takes advantage of that to then learn the next language and see its pitfalls.
So I asked Derek Wang, the founder of Stratified, a very successful machine learning company in Charlotte, and it was Python immediately.
Yeah.
But of course that's his...
Python is very productive. If you're going to actually do something with it, that's a great language.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm with you. I think your answer more represents my thought, which is I don't care what you learn, just learn something.
Yeah, well, everyone should know it.
The only counter argument to C++ might be you don't really learn the HTTP request response mechanism, which is really important.
Yeah.
So, but if you can learn C++, you can learn anything, right? Like if you can dodge a wrench.
Yes, you can dodge a ball.
So, going back to Appian, you were obviously very close to that success story.
Yeah.
And you've been successful on your own, but they've achieved just a different
Oh,
trajectory. What have you taken away from your relationship with Matt? Was there a moment in your mind where they made a decision that could have gone badly but turned out to be like, this is what took off and this is what made them who they are today?
I mean, there are tons of those, and I actually once had lunch with Matt and said, this is awesome. You're Joe Montana, and I'm a high school quarterback, and I get to have lunch with you every now and then, right? But I think the cool thing about business is it's ever changing, right? And Matt's a big board game guy, and he's actually published games and won competitions, and he says like he never plays the same board game twice because he always wants to do something new and different. That's how business is. You don't get to just run the same play until the defense stops it, the way football teams used to run jet sweep or whatever, right?
Or me in Tecmo Bowl.
Yeah, right.
The 10-yard fight was the one where you ran a certain direction and you just
quarterback sneak.
Yeah. No, but that's great advice.
Yeah, and I've seen him have to pivot through, literally pivot a couple of times, right? From a services company to a portal company to a BPM company to they've really kind of crossed from BPM into this broader digital transformation and low code concept at this point. And, for a couple of those pivots, I was there as an Appian employee, and for a couple of, been at Macedon and seeing how Matt adapts to an ever-changing market. And I think, kind of getting back to those companies that get disintermediated left and right, being able to see, the dark clouds on the horizon and get out in front of it was something Matt was always great at.
That's great.
Early on, I think everyone else in the space made their development environment in Eclipse, which is a very developer-oriented world. And Matt said, no, at some point we're going to need end users to be able to do the visual parts. And Appian was the only one that was web-based, and then that turned out to have all sorts of positive side effects, right? Like if you're on a computer that's inside corporate headquarters, you're not administrator of your own box and you can't install anything, but guess what? You can hit our website, right?
And that was, not to change the subject, but that was how Hotmail became a success.
Yeah,
they were
the
actually,
first webmail, yeah.
Well, they were working on a different thing. They had built a different thing that company had created, but to collaborate, they couldn't collaborate because they couldn't install any desktop software, and they needed to do email, so they created Hotmail, and their VC was like, no, this is a product.
Right. I think they got 400 million from Microsoft or something.
Yeah, 400 or 500 million, something amazing. And in a very short, I want to say it was like 19, 20 months.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. Wow. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So you've had very big success in services. Services focused on the product, but still services.
Yeah.
Appian started out in services, made the jump to product, and obviously had just insane levels of success. Do you think you'll ever create a product company, or are services your bread and butter for the long run? How do you think about the two?
No, long run is definitely products.
Okay.
I think that's where you always have to go to have the biggest impact on the world. Services has been fun, and I've learned a lot, and obviously there's money to be made. We do great things, but you'll never get the kind of scale out of a services company that you get out of a product. And scale is obviously how you have the most impact. Can
the two coexist, or?
Yeah, you have a lot of companies that produce a product and then do services with it, right? Oracle is famous for having made a lot of money that way. And this is particularly true in like the enterprise software space, right? Where products aren't the kind of thing you just like turn on and use the way like consumer electronics are, right? Like there are no services for a Blu-ray player other than, come fix mine if it broke. If anyone uses Blu-ray players anymore.
I never bought one.
Yeah.
I literally went straight from DVD to
stream.
Not even streaming. Originally, I did buy like the old Apple TV that had a hard drive on it, and you could actually buy all of the digital downloads on iTunes. But never had the Blu-ray, and they were competing with HD DVD at the time, which was an interesting one where everybody thought this was another VHS and beta, and it was like, no, this is different. Nobody gives a shit about either of these things.
Right. They'll both be out of business in 5 years.
They're both gone.
Yeah. Again, because technology just moves so much faster now. Right?
Way too fast. Yeah, it's hard for the rest of the world not the rest of the world, but the rest other industries to catch up with.
Yeah.
With tech, it just moves at a pace that's impossible to keep up
Right.
with if you're not a tech company.
Well, which is why every company out there needs to become a tech company, right?
Yeah.
They need to embrace it.
Well, do you think they can become a tech company? Do you think every company can be a tech company?
It's interesting, a long time ago at Amentra, Geico was one of our biggest clients, right? And like, if you boil down what Geico is, it's a database and a rules engine with a website in front of it.
And great commercials.
Yeah, but ultimately, like, if any company is a tech company, I would say it's Geico.
Okay.
But obviously, insurance is one of those like several hundred-year-old industries that never changes, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you were to argue any company is not a tech company, insurance might be where you started.
Yep.
Right? And so I think there are a lot of companies out there that either proactively chose a business model around technology or are going to get forced into that when someone becomes Netflix to their Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster could have become a tech company, but it didn't.
Yeah. And I read a really interesting article because Blockbuster wasn't necessarily as black and white as everybody assumes it was. It wasn't just one bad decision. There were a series of decisions that were made and things that happened where they could have done things, but they made what at the time was a logical local decision, but globally it was a very bad decision. And we all like to think that we're above that, but I don't know if Mark Zuckerberg or Reid Hoffman is running Blockbuster if they're able to fix it, because there's just so much technical debt, there's so much legacy, there's,
I don't know. It's interesting because I do hear that argument a lot, right? But then you see guys like Jeff Bezos who basically started a bookstore and said, let's put a website in front of it, right?
Sure.
But then eventually said, well, we need to build the biggest data center in the world, so let's build two, and invented the cloud.
No, and I agree, but what if Bezos instead had been hired to run Barnes and Noble? Well, and they've actually come out to a halfway decent, but let's say he was hired to run Borders.
I forget, did you build Borders website?
We built some DNN. We built DNN.com at my the first company I went to work for. But let's just say Borders, Jeff Bezos runs it. Can he fix that?
So at some point you got to get out all your leases and close all your stores, right?
Yeah, you've got all of this debt that you can't just walk away from. You've got employees and you've got lives and you've got wives and children and you can't necessarily.
And those people couldn't be running Amazon warehouses.
No, like you can't get there right away. So it's, and again, I don't know the answer to it, but I just think that that's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
Can a person make the same change inside of a big company as they do on their own? I've met people who have made fantastic changes inside of a big company. I talked to Scott Lean a lot about Bank of America and kind of what they were working with, and you're reaching a quarter of the household in all of America. Like, an innovator can be way more innovative in that environment if they can navigate the bureaucracy and handle everything.
Yeah.
But there's still some inertia that just stops you in those environments typically, because you typically don't see the big innovations happening there. Although I say that, and then I don't know if you've been following Zelle at all.
Yeah, Zelle is great. I use it actually.
I use it a lot because, especially with like people from my parents' generation.
I pay my landscaper on Zelle.
Or even my own generation, because I'm like, do you have Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Citi or JP Morgan? Probably.
Right.
Then
no,
you
I
come
don't
to
have
mind.
Venmo. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I prefer Venmo. It's a much easier to use experience.
Yeah.
But Zelle to me is an example of a big industry punching back and saying, we're going to leverage all of this skill that we've got. And I think I think a big part of the next 10 years in technology is going to be, how do you help these companies punch back who have historically been just sitting back and getting punched and like, okay, we still have enough of our core business. But the core business in many cases is going away, and if they don't innovate, they are going to be consigned to the dust heap that Blockbuster found themselves on.
It's really interesting. There have got to be case studies out there of giant companies that have pivoted, right? Like I can think of a few tech companies. Apple getting into all the things that are not Macs at some point, right?
And then making Mac awesome too.
Right. As a side effect, right? Or Microsoft realizing the browser was the future platform and not the operating system, and saying we need an all online strategy.
Sure.
Right? But outside of technology, nothing comes to mind.
Yeah.
Probably because of a lot of that legacy.
I mean, I guess I don't know.
But that'd be an interesting case study to go look up the 10 best pivots of
I don't know a lot about 3M, but I think because of the nature of 3M's business,
they're inventing new products all the time.
They're always inventing new products. So I think there are examples, and I bet that who's the author who wrote Jim Collins? Jim Collins. That's it. I bet that probably should be the next book that's written. Is just how do companies completely reinvent themselves. Not good, great, not built to last, but like how do I
something to different
pivot? Yeah, exactly. Well, that's interesting. So Austin, this has been great. It's we're coming up on an hour and 40 minutes here.
Wow.
So you mentioned earlier you drive a Lamborghini.
Yes, an old one, but yes.
My favorite story you told me was you used to have an E-Class Mercedes.
Yeah.
It's faster than the Lambo.
Yeah,
much easier to drive, much safer.
All of the above, yes.
Cheaper.
In the shop less, all of those things.
Any thoughts you have on the next exotic you're going to buy, or the next sedan, or are you going to stay on this SUV train? You mentioned that you have the SUV currently, so what are your thoughts there?
Well, I do have kids, and I needed something kind of practical to balance out.
Maserati is always practical.
Of course, yes. I tried to get a Mercedes SUV, and I lost my order, which led to a fiasco.
Which one?
I was going to get an GLE 43.
Okay.
Yeah. And then they lost my order.
So Chris has the GLE 43 Coupe, which is just a sick crossover.
It is. I was going to get
crossover.
regular.
You were going to get the sedan. Okay.
Yeah. Again, because I wanted something more functional.
Yep.
But yeah, they lost my order and wouldn't extend my lease, and I basically had to give up on the brand. So
you never coming back?
No, well, I mean someday I might, but it just wasn't a great experience for what you expect from that brand. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's so much to the brand of the car that is not like, even to me, it's like the coffee that they serve in the service center. There's so much to it, and that's disappointing from a great brand. I had a very disappointing experience with BMW.
I remember you telling me that.
Yes,
engine trouble or something.
So I'm a BMW guy.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. I'm a BMW and Porsche guy. Like, that is what I identify with.
Yeah.
But at some point along the line, I realized that I wanted an AMG, and so I went to AMG. But for a long time, all I wanted was BMW.
Yeah.
And so I had the V10 2008 M5, and it was a beast. It was amazing sounding. It was fast, but the gas mileage sucked. The reliability was very poor.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted a new car, and they came out with the twin turbo V8, which was
more like the Mercedes.
50% better gas mileage, and maybe 10% better horsepower.
Yeah, tough to beat.
Faster. Yeah. So I order one, and then my old M5 just. The check engine light comes on, and I go to my dealer, and he's like, "Look, you need a new motor. It's $30,000." So I write letters to BMW. I'm like, "You stand behind your product."
Right. This is in like a 4-year-old car or something.
This was a little older than that. This might have been 6 years old.
Yeah.
I was traveling a lot, so I just didn't drive a lot.
Right.
So it was a 6 or 7 year old car with like 32,000 miles.
Yeah.
On it, and I canceled the order for the new one. I'd already ordered the new V8, and I canceled it. I wrote a letter, and they finally got back to me, and were like, "Yeah, we'll do this for $2,500. We'll give you a brand new engine." And
cool.
So I had to pay for the labor, and I did it, and I bought the new car. But at that point, I was like, I'm going to explore something new.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I realized that AMG and Mercedes are two completely different brands.
Yeah.
And it's what AMG represents to me is the best of both worlds. Like extreme, like I'm getting after it, but still at the same time, like the ultimate in comfort and security, because the M's were never comfortable cars. They were never.
Right.
But you get in the AMG, and it's like, yes, this car will snap your neck, and it will sound awesome.
Right.
And I knew when I went to the BMW dealer to drop off the second M5, and they were like, "What'd you get?" And I'm like, "I got an AMG S-Class."
Yeah.
And they were like, "You know what? Like, they get the sound right in a way that we just can't even compare with it." And it is, like, when you downshift in an AMG as you did in your E63.
Oh, that was the best engine I ever had.
it backfires.
It does. Yeah.
So.
In a good way.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's in a great way. Well, look, Austin, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me again. I think my audience really likes to hear from people like yourself who probably have been growing through their career and are trying to figure out, do I really double down on this corporate career, or do I go, do something else? And so I think your story is going to inspire a lot of people. So have I missed anything? Is there anything we should talk about at this point?
I think you got all the highlights. Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Cool. Very cool. Thank you so much, Austin.
You're welcome.
We'll talk again soon. I already have written down a few notes on a couple things I want to talk about on the next interview, so
Cool.
Cheers to that one.
All right, hit me up.
All right, take care.
Yep.